Society for I think I just want to say a little about how it worked this evening. I think people are particularly interested when they don't speak directly about themselves, or about their vacations, or about their dreams. If you were finding no one wants that. But about things they care about. And that's what Gernot will do this evening. He'll speak about one person, one place, and one thing that will be meaningful to him. We're recording for broadcast, so I have to ask you not to curse. And please have person be. There will be Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions for the end, what else? Because we are recording for broadcast, it's a radio show. And I think it's a show, and that means there's going to be music. And start the show. And I'm delighted that this evening the music will be maybe Mitch.
Thank you, Randy. This is a song I wrote about the early days of radio. Oh, me, I wanna be on board a radio. Don't you know I wanna be on board a radio? And if I can get to board a radio, you know that they will hear me all over this land. All the way from the green hills of old Spokane, I mean to the muddy shoreline of Lake Pontchartrain. Up Alberta way, they will all know my name, and I mean that they will hear me all over this land. And if they receive me in the Rio Grande, I mean that they will know my voice over in Alabama. You know when they flip the switch, my voice will fill the air. You know that they will hear me all over this land. I mean all over this land, all over this land, all over this land. They will hear me all over this land. I know I'll make it to border radio one day, and that my guitar will ring out the Ohio way. It'll go across the Mississippi down to Galveston Bay. You know that they will hear me all over this land. I really do mean all over this land, all over this land, all over this land. You know that they will hear me all over this land. You know me, I wanna be on board a radio. Don't you know I wanna be on board a radio? And if I can get to board a radio, you know that they will hear me all over this land.
Pretty great. It's now a regular feature of the show that the guest comes out and unmasks. And I keep thinking it's not going to be you. So, Gernot, who's your person?
The late, great Marty Weitzman, who I met the same day I met my now wife of 20 years. Been in the same room together as my now wife of 20 years. So September 17th, 1998, a Thursday. Freshman year in college. I want to be a climate economist. I think I want to be a climate economist. I don't know what a climate economist does or what a climate economist is. And Marty Weitzman was a climate economist. So I went to his office hours. And usually, you know, as an 18-year-old, right, you show up to a Harvard professor's office hours, and they sort of tell you, you know, stay in school, don't do drugs, and come back in a couple years once you've taken some economics. He actually sat me down and gave me a yellow legal pad, number 2 pencil, and he had the same in front of him. And he sort of walked through his most famous contribution to climate economics, how to solve climate change, how do you tax carbon, how do you limit carbon, and so on. And he sort of explained it to me, not just as, hey, look, you don't understand this quite yet, but trust me, this is important. He walked me through like, you know, I was his own son, 18-year-old.
But if you were his son and that's what he spent his time talking about, you'd really get sick of it, wouldn't you?
Fair enough, yes. I have talked to his daughter since, and yes, there's a bit of that. There's a bit of that. But basically, like an hour later, I still sit there, and he explains to me how to do research, why it's called research, right? You search and you search and you search again. And as luck would have it, I almost missed, I made it fortunately, to a Kofi Annan speech right after. And yes, 6 months later, it turned out that was the first time I was in the same room as my now wife of 20 years. And our 10-year-old son, of course, is called Annan. So yes, quite the day.
It was a very close thing. He might have been called Marty. And that would have been much less cool.
Exactly. Yes.
You dodged that one. Is it? If it's not too naive, what is a climate economist?
Well, a living, breathing oxymoron, right? So you either care about the economy, right, jobs and interest rates in China and so on, or you care about birds and bees. You don't do both, or at least, frankly, I've been doing this now for 20 years, I guess. And the first 10 of that, that was the first thing you heard. It was, wait, pick your side, right? You're either pro-business or you are, you care about the planet. Well, turns out, the problem is that we are not doing the right thing. We are guiding things in the wrong direction. Well, the solution is re-guiding, re-channeling those market forces, and that's exactly what climate economics is supposed to be doing.
Can you explain also, one of the things I read up about Marty Weitzman, because, the significance of low probability but catastrophic events.
Fat tails.
That's his big thing, right?
It was the last 10 years or so of his life. So he has lots of big things, turns out. The share economy is his big thing, like stock options. Now, I can't say he invented stock options, but he invented basically the idea that if workers were to own parts of companies, then things would work out differently in the economy. He wrote a book about it in the early 80s, which, by the way, the New York Times editorial board called the best idea since John Maynard Keynes in economics. So he's had a few things. So but fat tails, yes. Or it's basically this idea that, look, what we know is bad enough about climate change. What we don't know, these tiny probability, high impact events, is what's gonna come back to bite us. And if you take that seriously, it turns the entire logic on its head. It's no longer the averages, the means, the medians, the most likely is what matters the most. It's actually the least likely scenarios that have a high impact that are actually defining the final outcome.
So give me an example.
Last time there was as much CO2 in the atmosphere as there is today. It was over 3 million years ago, Pliocene. Sea levels were 10 to 20, 30 meters higher than they are today. Now, nobody's predicting that that's what's going to happen now. right? We would be underwater here in New York, right? Most of New York would be.
I live on the
underwater.
5th floor, so it's
Yeah,
you're on your own,
yes,
pal.
yeah.
What do I
You
care?
might want to check where the elevator is
Yeah,
being. Fair enough. But, right, it's the question of, wait, why are climate scientists not predicting that sort of extreme outcome based on, frankly, the stuff we see out there in the atmosphere right now? And Marty, to his credit, this is sort of, how do you do research, right? He went back and read these hundreds, thousands of pages worth of climate reports, IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, these very dense scientific reports, and basically unearthed something that apparently most climate scientists, almost every other climate scientist, missed in this, that it is precisely these low probability events that may actually be much, much worse than what we think is most likely.
You guys wrote a book together.
We did. Climate Shock.
Whose picture was on it? Both pictures? Did you both have pictures on the flap?
We did. It was actually a picture taken by Jennifer Weitzman, his wife, in our apartment, in our living room. So,
Your life is so cool. But say the name of the book and explain what you
Climate
wrote.
Shock. And yeah, it's basically putting the shock into the whole climate story, which is precisely these, on the one hand, the fat tails, the sort of the stuff that is really going to come back to haunt us. And then the second half of the book is about geoengineering, which is yet again one of these things that when you hear it described the first time is nuts, is sort of should shock you into action.
But it hasn't shocked people into action. The end of the world has not shocked people, or at least has not shocked governments into sufficient action. I think everyone in this room would agree with that.
You mean us publishing the book didn't solve climate change?
I know. I blame you personally, Gernot. But this seems uncanny to me that you present a lucid case and that this is quite dire. What do you make of that? Does it drive you nuts? You seem awfully cheerful for someone facing the end of the world with real sophistication.
Well, it's too late for pessimism.
Ooh,
but
book
it's,
title.
Yeah,
book
exactly.
title.
That's my next one, yes.
But, is it?
Well, it is, yes. Right? And frankly, okay, so my bread and butter is sort of these negative tipping points, right? So these low probability, high impact events. Frankly, what we are in right now is this race between these negative tipping points and the positive ones. There are these, socioeconomic tipping points where basically, look, things are dire, yes, but things are moving much, much faster in the positive direction than, frankly, anyone would have imagined 5, 10 years ago. Now, is it fast enough? No. It's a race between these negative and positive tipping points, but frankly, got to work on the positive ones, otherwise, we've lost us already.
All right. I'm a little surprised to hear any optimism this evening. I was planning on having a good cry, but okay, have it your way. Did you really, when you went into his office, did you really already know as an undergraduate that you wanted to be a climate economist?
So, believe it or not, I applied to exactly one college in this country. Stupidly, I had no idea how to do this. Right? I grew up in a small town Austria, applied to one school across the big pond, and I applied there. Okay, one, because that's the one college I knew of, and two, they had this environmental economics program there, where you could basically study the environment and economics, and you don't have to do it twice over. You could do it once.
So you did know. You're like a teenager and you're going, one day I am going to be I wanted to be a cowboy at your age. You're so much smarter than me. It's really disheartening. I may have to ask you to leave. Did you know who Marty Weitzman was before you got to school?
Sort of, yes. I heard the name before. And, okay, so come on. Every teenager is an environmentalist, right? I just never grew up.
So
right?
you're not that much smarter than me,
you're
you're just that much younger than me. Either way, it's pretty bad to be me.
Well, my wife does make me wear glasses so I don't get confused with my students.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah, you're very youthful looking. I would be remiss if I didn't ask about the great manure theft of 2005.
April 1st, by the way, is when that happened.
Would you explain to these people?
Which was
what
also
that
Marty Weitzman's birthday.
This is going to be a really sad story.
Well, actually, okay, the opinions differ. But the amazing thing there is, so Marty built his own home on this marsh island in Gloucester, Massachusetts, an hour or so north of Boston. And, there's him building the home, and then basically him building his Japanese flower garden that needed a lot of manure, fertilizer. And opinions differ, but apparently he got permission from a farmer to just take the manure off their hands because it's worthless essentially. Turns out that was no longer the case by the time he took a truckload of it, and the son of that farmer caught him and called the police.
Called the cops.
Called the cops on his birthday, on April 1st.
But this proceeded to court.
It did, yes. And
this just seems nuts. But he's fined, as
well,
I
I mean,
have
the
it.
headlines, the Jay Leno monologue writes itself, right? Harvard professor gets caught stealing.
Manure, I know. It goes out, it comes in. Yeah, I know. The jokes do write themselves. I'm sorry I brought it up. There's something that's less funny than manure. I guess everything is less funny than manure. But he had a very tragic death.
He did. He committed suicide. A year after he lost out on winning the Nobel Prize, that was.
It's childish to ask why someone commits suicide. It's complicated and dark, and I think ultimately unknowable. And I don't mean to be glib about it, but to feel despair for not winning the Nobel Prize, well, that means we're all failed. I mean, he was so accomplished and so admired by his colleagues. This is so unsettling.
It is. I mean, okay, so turns out Jennifer Weitzman didn't just take this picture in our living room a few years prior. She was also a kid's piano teacher. So every Friday afternoon, kids in the living room playing piano, and I'm with Marty in his study. I had never seen him quite as nervous as the Friday before Columbus Day, 2018, when the prize was announced. And okay, so it's a small, at that level, it's a fairly small world, and nobody really knows, of course, but yeah, there were mumblings that this is the turn, right? This is going to happen. This, it's going to be this year, and then it wasn't. And I can't say that was the reason, but had he won, things might have turned out very differently. Yes.
Well, I like to end each segment with the audience beaten into misery. So let's take a moment, and we'll be right back.
It's nice to hear your voice again. I've waited all day long, even wrote a song for you. It's strange the way you make me feel. With just a word or two, I'd like to do the same for you. It's nice the way you say hello. And how are things with you? I love you. But very soon it's time to go. An office job to do while I'm here writing songs for you. Strange how a phone call can change your day, take you away, away from this feeling of being alone. Bless the telephone. It's nice the way you say my name, not very fast or slow, just soft and low, the same as when you tell me how you feel. I feel the same way too, I'm very much in love with you. Strange how a phone call can change your day, take you away, away from this feeling of being alone. Bless the telephone.
Amy Minch. Thank you, Will. So, where is your place?
The B19 ski slope, going from the Stubner Kogel down into the Angertal, to play up my German accent here. Sort of, I guess, the guilty pleasure, or frankly, maybe the reason why I work on climate, right, is skiing. And I guess it's that particular ski slope because that was for the first time when my now 8 and 10-year-old were roaming free, and 5 years ago at this point. So yes, proud Austro-American dad, watching the two kids go down an Austrian black slope into the abyss.
Did you just push them down?
Not quite.
Because that's how they taught me to swim. It was horrible. I'm still in therapy about it.
Well, actually, so we lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts at the time, and we were the one family who took the commuter rail out to the final stop to go skiing at Wachusett Mountain every weekend, which is the ski slope going from 2,000 feet down to 1,000 feet.
All
Right? So 1,000 feet. So the Austrian version goes from 2,000 meters down to 1,000 meters, slightly more challenging. And yeah, this is when you graduate, right? When you go down the Austrian black slope.
But there's a moral problem, is there not?
If
you live in New York and you enjoy skiing in Austria.
The ton of CO2, like literally the metric ton of CO2.
Is that what it is?
One, right? Not the whole plane, right? You personally. Middle seat, economy class, right?
Right.
1 metric ton of CO2. Yeah, there is. And frankly, there's currently no solution, right? Okay, so I justified because, look, my parents live there, so I would want to see them anyways. So you can combine things with the family visit. On the other hand, yes, of course, right? Turns out you can take the commuter rail to go skiing in this country, right? Why fly?
Right. So how do you reconcile it?
Poorly.
Poorly.
Okay, so look, right? So I'm a vegetarian. I don't drive. I don't have a driver's license. I've never driven.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how. I wouldn't know. Okay, so the excuse there is you have to be 18 in Austria to start driving. Okay, so I show up here with my 1 suitcase for college, right? And everyone here already knows how to drive. So, you feel stupid on both sides of the Atlantic. And 5 years later, I've only ever lived in cities, so I don't have to. But yeah, you add it all up and, you do all the right things. And then your 10-year-old is a gold member at United Mileage Plus.
You do for these kids, and they break your heart. But in a theoretical way, we're kind of in Marty Weitzman territory again, aren't we? That you could do a sort of personal, individual version of cap and trade. if there's a way to measure all this, that, okay, so everyone is allotted a certain amount of energy use.
Yep.
Right? And then we start checking off what you use. So if you drive X number of miles, well, that costs you big time. If you eat meat, that costs you. If you decide to heat your home in the winter, I never do. I just wear a lot of sweaters. But that costs you. But because you lead a very frugal life, you could decide to use your energy credits to fly to ski, and that would be fine. No?
Well, that's not quite how. Right. So 1 ton of CO2 is a ton of CO2. It doesn't matter how it's generated.
Right.
Right.
So
the joke. Right. So I'm a dual citizen. Right. So the average American emits 16, 18, 20 tons of CO2. The average European emits around 10. Right. So I get 30. That's not how this works either. Right. And by the way, the global average is around 6 or so tons of CO2. So yeah, 6 times across the Atlantic, right? And you are there. Okay, so yes, no car, no meat, okay, we live in the city, right? 3rd floor walk up, 750 square feet, family of 4, right? Get to read about it on the pages of New York Magazine about how we spend too much money to decarbonize the place, right? So yeah, you do all the right things. And yeah, twice across the Atlantic, right, is 4 tons of CO2 round trip. And I fly twice across the Atlantic every year.
So, well, if this were posed as a moral question, actions have to be justified on their own, and that because I'm very nice 6 days a week doesn't mean I get to murder a guy on the 7th day because I've done all these offsetting.
Wait, isn't that what Catholicism is all about? Like you show up, right? And then
but for Jews, I can say,
fair enough. Right?
while it's important to do virtuous things and to do things, altruistic things, that is not a license to do forbidden
Absolutely
things.
not. Now, of course, it shows something much, much bigger, right? So, look, if this were about individual action and only what do we do, right? I wouldn't be a climate economist. I would be a priest or a rabbi or something, right? As a climate economist, right? So you know that it's the system that needs to change. And you basically know that it's this interplay of technology on the one hand, individual action, yes, of course, right? You would want to use that. You need to want to use this new technology, and of course, it's economics and politics and all of the above, right? So when Greta Thunberg, right, takes the sailboat across the Atlantic, right? She's painfully aware of the fact that it's a fairly luxurious position to be in to take the time to do this. Right? And, by the way, opinions differ whether that particular sail actually cost more emissions, right? Because the 4-person team then has to get back somehow and so on, right?
All right, and the sailboat was made of coal, I understand. And baby condors.
Not quite, but yeah, really, frankly, what you show with this is that for some actions, it takes technology, and frankly, we have that technology already. It's extremely expensive. So for example, right, so one version here is you emit your CO2, you have to ensure that you personally pay for sucking it back out.
Right.
And yeah, we can do that. It's $1,000 a ton of CO2. So if your round trip, right, is this 1 ton of CO2 emissions, your plane ticket just got $1,000 more expensive. And actually, I can say, for the very first time, I was in Austria for a conference a few months ago, and for the very first time, I told the organizer, look, I'm going to do this, but you have to pay this extra $1,000 to get the CO2 back out and bury it underground. And, reluctantly, but they paid up, and
they did.
They did. Now, okay, does that now give you a license to just fly willy-nilly? No, because of course it's still a lot better not to emit it in the first place than to suck it back out. But yeah, there is a techno-fix. It's expensive. And yes, there are moral implications too.
Gernot, as part of your point here, that the futility, or not the futility, the limitation of individualist actions to what are essentially societal problems.
Yes and no. So, okay, so, this is me boasting about spending $100,000 to decarbonize our apartment. And, okay, so, yeah, that's a lot of money, right? No, not everyone must do that in order to live morally. But frankly, there's the advanced team, right? There's those of us who, have the money, or at least can get it somehow from the bank, and then can basically demonstrate and say, look, a heat pump is a fundamentally better product than the gas furnace. Yeah, the gas boiler furnace currently costs $5,000. The heat pump costs $15,000. It's more expensive. But yes, it's the future. And yes, it takes those of us who can afford it to basically, splurge right now to, take the splurge and basically help climb the learning curve, slide down the cost curve for the rest of us. Because, of course, the more of these things we deploy, the cheaper they get.
Right. And you're sort of the avant-garde demonstrating for other people, here's a different way to live.
Yes, right? And okay, there too, right? It takes...
So we're putting you on salary for that.
It takes wanting to live a certain way, right? Sort of the 750 square feet loft with, family of 4, right? Where you talk to the realtor, right? And she sort of looks at you and she doesn't do that, right? So she specializes in, lower Manhattan lofts and has never dealt with a family before, right? That's not how this works, right? You go out to the burbs, right? You live in Jersey. Because that's where you can get the bedrooms, and by now every kid needs their own bathroom and so on, right? And the bigger the home, the better, right? Now, no, that's not the right thing either. And yes, it takes a certain attitude to want to live that way in the first place.
You know what will reconcile your ski problem is as the Earth continues to warm, the snow will just melt. It will be the end of skiing, and there you go.
And you're ending once again on a downer.
Yeah. Well, no, we're not done yet. I can get even more depressing. But because I wondered, is there a case that certain recreational pursuits are more or less moral? And my example was going to be golf, that I think is essentially immoral. That it's
of course.
The golf course, right? It's like a suburban lawn times 10, and it has all the disadvantages.
And it's not a sport, by the way, right? Supreme Court said so.
And
right?
any sport you can play with a cigarette in your mouth doesn't count as a sport.
Yeah. Agreed.
But so right. The golf course uses a ridiculous amount of water, a ridiculous amount of chemicals,
a ridiculous amount of land, right? Let's begin with that, right?
As opposed to say playground basketball, which I think is the most virtuous of all sports. It's essentially urban rather than suburban.
Yep.
It takes a space the size of this little space right here. Mm-hmm. You can have 8 people playing ball.
Well, there's a broader story here, right? So when you think environmentalism, you often think, green out in the countryside and so on. No, the best place to live is right here in the city.
Yes.
Right? Of course it is. Right? We emit a third of the CO2 of the average Bourbonite. Right? So welcome to my Twitter feed, right? Making fun of Bourbonites all day long. And yeah, it's a real problem, right? So more square feet of space for your own home. Of course, that's linked to CO2 emissions as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Well, you've dragged us reluctantly to a sort of upbeat ending. So less golf, more basketball.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We'll be right back.
They say that white light is made up of all other colors of light, and I believe it's true. It shines on me, and what I reflect back is always deep, enduring blue. It's older than any virgin's vestment, Oh, it's bluer than my pretty baby's eye. Oh, it's deeper than all the lonely ocean. It's never near, it's always nigh. Sometimes I forget I'm Wednesday's daughter, but never for long, and never alone. I feel like blue, made up of color that can't be seen, it must be known. And one little life like mine, one life like mine, ordinary and true, can go on forever in this lonely world, can be painted deep, enduring blue.
Thank you. So what's your thing?
My bike, my folding bike, right behind me.
Can
Right
everyone see this? This is a Brompton folding bicycle.
Check is in the mail from the Brompton factory, yes. Yes, it is, and it's a proper bike, and it folds up, and it's sort of the most convenient thing you can imagine in the city. It's carry-on on an airplane, or the Accelera, for that matter, right?
You take a lot of flights, don't you?
I do, yes. I can tell you the biking on the boardwalk in San Diego to the annual meeting of the American Association of Energy and Resource Economists gets you downtown a lot faster than waiting in line for the cab and taking the taxi there, right? Or for the matter in Boston, it's actually pretty amazing. Like you can get to Logan Airport in Boston by bike. Okay, not quite as fast as on the turnpike, but it's not just doable, right? But frankly, there's no other way to live.
The bikeable, walkable city is, to my way of thinking, the ideal city, and everyone loves it once they're exposed to it.
Yes, right, and again, right. So there too, it's sort of okay. I've never had a driver's license, right? So I wouldn't know what the alternative is. Yes, it's sort of the most convenient thing to get. You stand at Penn Station, you want to get home, Lower Manhattan. So a taxi takes 25 minutes in traffic. The train is 25 minutes. Walking, surprisingly, is also around 25 minutes. Biking is 12.
Right.
And yeah, that's just how you get around.
And it is quiet, so you're not disturbing your neighbors. It is non-polluting. You get a brisk aerobic workout. You're in incredibly great shape. I can see that. I'm glad we're
right
not...
back at you, yes.
Yeah,
Well, you're a biker too, right? Yes, exactly.
I got here tonight on my bike. I mean, it's no big deal. I just live at 94th and West End. Don't call before you come by. But you live in the Village. But that's how I get around town in New York. bike or the train. Yeah.
Yeah, and frankly, okay, so we live on Bleecker Street, right? Amazingly enough, so yeah, our two kids are the only ones who leave the house with their bikes, despite the bike path right in front of our house, literally. You have to cross the bike path to get to the street. And it's just faster, more convenient, better.
It's morally superior.
Yes, and it is morally superior too.
It might not be morally superior to using mass transit, but it's morally superior to the private car.
Sure, but frankly, right, because of everything else that comes with it, right? So, okay, so we walk to the grocery store, right? Yeah, you buy less stuff. Of course you do, right? Or, if you don't have the car, you bike to, on a weekend, let's say, right? Yeah, you don't get quite as far, it turns out, right? We make it to Brooklyn, right? We don't make it to Montauk on a daily basis. On the other hand, actually, okay, we moved from Cambridge, Massachusetts to New York City.
Wait, explain
by bike.
This. You moved from Cambridge to New York by bike.
Well, there were, commuter rails and ferries involved.
But how did you get your stuff here?
That got moved for us, turns out,
well, fair
by,
enough.
18
But you came from Cambridge to Manhattan on bicycles.
Yeah, and the now 10-year-old, it was 3 years ago, so he biked himself. He was 7. And the 5-year-old was on a bike seat on my folding bike. And yes, okay, so we moved via Block Island, for example. Right? So yes, there were 2 ferries involved. Yeah, it's fun. It's a vacation, of course. I mean, we didn't do it for climate reasons, right? We did it because we had a week. But why not?
Well, why not? And that to me seems a key point is that people will not choose to travel by subway or by bicycle because it's more virtuous. They'll choose their mode of transportation because it's most convenient or most pleasant.
Sure, and turns out, okay, if you live in the city and need to get around in the city, yeah, the most convenient and most pleasant way is by bike and by train.
Right, and for me too, and I'm 73, so that age is no obstacle for this. In Manhattan is like perfect for the bicycle because it's relatively compact and relatively flat. Unless you're going up to Columbia, in which
Fair
case
enough,
you're going
right?
to be...
So, okay, so there, then that's why I have a folding bike, right? So I bike across town to the one train in the morning, right? Fold it up, take the train up, so I arrive with my crisp button-down shirt, right? And at night I bike home fast, sweat like a pig when I arrive, right? But yeah, that's my workout, right? And I save on gym membership, and
the flaw in this, or the obstacle to this now, I think, being more widespread, is if you want people to bike. If you want to be a biking city, you have to make it safe for people to bike.
Of course.
And that means you have to have proper bike infrastructure, which is why, everyone in Amsterdam bikes of any age. It's like 80%, I'm making up numbers now, but they're close. 80% of all trips in Amsterdam are taken on bicycles, regardless of the age of the person and regardless of the season.
Yeah, I know they're like for Copenhagen, right? It's like, yes, it's 80%.
The 2 best bicycling cities. And because you can do it safely, and when you get there, there's a place to leave your bike.
Yep. And because that's another, right? Where do people choose to live, right? So, New York City, 8 million New Yorkers, 20 million who sometimes call themselves New Yorkers, right? Well, 12 million of them live in single-family homes out in the burbs where, yes, you could, right? You bike to the train, you take the train into the city, and you bike, right? But of course, right, you also need to arrange your life that, yes, you can get everywhere without a car.
Yeah. Why not a city bike? Why the folding bike?
Well, it turns out Lance was doing steroids and not folding bikes for a reason, right? So there are better bikes available, but the folding bike is still a lot better than the city bike, a lot faster.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Another piece of this is when you get there, you have to have a place to leave your bike. Unlike you, I don't use the folding bike. I just have a clunky hybrid I use to get around. And you have to have a place to lock your bike. So when I came over here, I sort of checked to do a rough count on how many bike racks the Historical Society has. My approximate figure is 0. There are none. There's not a bike rack here. That's not right. You want to encourage people to be clean and green when they come here. And all you have to do is call up DOT, and they'll put them in for free. It doesn't cost you anything.
Might take a few months, but yes.
Well, months is optimistic, I agree. but you know, it's
But
not
actually,
like-
okay, so a lot is happening, right? Just
Is
to be
it?
clear. So the current mayor of New York, right, promised to convert 25% of all streetscapes into pedestrian and bike zones, right? I mean, even the language is right? Opening those streets, open streets.
No, that's
right?
a good thing, yeah.
And yeah, right? Now, of course, I know there's now better and worse ways of implementing that. That's true. But yes, it takes a shift like that to, frankly, achieve the sort of the mode shift here in terms of transport.
So, I mean, it seems for all three of your person, place, and your thing, you're in the position of being a kind of paragon, a kind of pioneer, demonstrating other ways to live. That you're demonstrating through individualist actions what to me seem like problems that require community solutions. But you're a front runner. I'm not. This isn't a criticism.
So it takes all of the
you're
above,
showing
right?
us the way.
Well, it's not okay. So, thank you, but no, right? So that's certainly not enough, right? Okay, so just to be clear, it may actually backfire, right? Because the real danger is that you basically say, oh, I bike a lot, or I refuse the plastic bag at the checkout counter, right? And then you walk your purchase onto the plane or back to your SUV or something, right?
Yeah.
Or, right, sort of solved climate change for the day because I bike to work, so now let me work for my day job at that coal company, right? Doing obviously more harm with my day job than with the 10-minute bike commute.
Well, and is there also the sort of moral danger of you cease, if you find an individualist solution, you cease to be a constituency for societal change?
Sort of,
Or
right?
do you-
Frankly, the real danger is, right, people look at me and say, okay, sorry, but I have no interest in looking like that particular nerd. So, bigger car it is.
You're a good-looking guy. You don't have to take this from people.
Face for radio.
Really? I give you a hard time? Well, I was slightly disconcerted when I talked to Gernot for the first time to arrange this. We FaceTimed, which meant video. And when you took the call on your bike and you were looking at video, I thought, I don't want to be on this call when you get killed. But it turned out you were walking your bike at that moment.
I was walking my bike, yes.
Yeah, it was a great
Still have my helmet on because you never know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I
wear my helmet all.
Falling air conditioning units. It's it's a dangerous place out there.
Yeah. My mask and my helmet came off just while we're talking, and as soon as we finish, they're both going back on. Because I don't know about these ceilings. I don't trust them. You'll take some questions from the audience, yes?
Happy to.
Before I do, join me in thanking Mamie Minch and Gernot Wagner. Yes.
Yes and no. Okay, the buck stops with the consumer, right? So it's you and I buying that stuff, right? That's one response, right? So at the end of the day, of course it's individual responsibility because, we buy the stuff, right? On the other hand, of course, what it takes is getting to this virtuous cycle of individual action leading to more systemic change, leading to more individual. It's sort of the story of biking in Copenhagen or Amsterdam, right? You look at pictures of Amsterdam in the 50s and the 40s, as many cars as in Manhattan today, right? What happened? Well, it turns out a little kid got killed on her bike by a driver, and that was the first time, right, that society got shaken into action, and that was the first bike path, basically. Right, and then more bikers, and it's sort of the first bikers, right, are the guys in the spandex suits and sort of the crazies, right? And then eventually it becomes normal, and now you look at Amsterdam, and nobody wears bike helmets,
right?
Because that's just how you get around, right? The prime minister gets around that way, right? And not just sort of for show to on Earth Day, but that's how you get to the office, right? And frankly, well, here in New York, in the city itself, yeah, it's the most convenient way to get around. It's the fastest way to get around, right? It's dangerous up to a point. Okay, so sure. Okay, so when we bike home from soccer practice with the two kids, where, by the way, yes, my wife and I are both biking. Yeah, it's defensive biking, right? The kids on the left, right? We between the SUVs and the kids. Sure, right? Now, yes, my 10-year-old knows what to do up to a point, right? Abandon bike, jump onto sidewalk, right? Has happened has been necessary a couple times so far. Yeah, there are, stern conversations with the Bourbonites, right? Welcome to my Twitter feed, right? Making fun of Bourbonites all day long. And of course, it's more than that, right? It is basically, look, dear DOT, Department of Transport, it would be really nice if you could do something other than install white bikes on the corners, but actually protect the bike lanes. And yes, here's a picture of my two kids biking down this particular lane, and the Suburban, right, literally the Suburban car right next to them, 3 times as tall as my 80-year-old on her bike. Right?
Yes.
I read the article about your retrofitting your apartment. It was very
You were the one? Okay.
I'm wondering, most people don't have, huge sums to do that kind of retrofitting. What would you say is the most economical and impactful thing that people can do within their apartments, not like
Depends how much agency you have that you can actually, right? Sort of what you can actually. Sorry? It's your typical co-op. Okay, so, my case, 7-unit co-op. I happen to be the co-op board president. Not sure whether it's a hazing ritual. We've lived there for 3 years, right? Or whether sort of, it's an honor and a privilege. Yeah, right? It takes getting your neighbors together to do this, and not to use this opportunity to shame the 6th and last neighbor into finally getting the heat pump. But yeah, right? 6 of the 7 of us, right, did it. And then there's the holdouts, right? There always is. Not because of money, but, okay, what is the first step? I mean, frankly, the very first step is insulate. Insulate, insulate, insulate. Doesn't take much. Takes a little bit more than, the FedEx envelope, right? Tyvek, right? Sort of the typical suburban home around here, right? The wood frame, and then you add the Tyvek, which literally is the same material as your FedEx envelope, right? Don't do that. There are better things to do. But yeah, that stuff pays for itself fairly fast, many times over. And unfortunately, apartment in New York, right? What you might end up doing is making your place even smaller, because it's an uphill battle to put it on the outside, right? It's easier to just, put it on the inside, right? But that's step 1. Step 2 is to get rid of burning fossil fuels in your own home, right? So if that means getting rid of the gas boiler, or the oil boiler, the oil is, of course, the worst, right? Gas is the next step, which basically means heat pump and induction stove. And yes, right, so there's the platinum version, right? You can spend $5,000 on the Wi-Fi enabled induction stove that, looks like it's from a chef's kitchen and so on. And yes, the French Laundry and Per Se use it too. Or you can go to IKEA and spend $50 on the induction plate, which you plug it into the normal outlet, and yes, it boils your water faster than your gas stove. So, that's not the most luxurious way of doing it, but it's $50. It's cheaper than your gas stove.
Yeah.
So, as a society, to accent the positive, would it be a valid way to cause change to give incentives governmentally, to give incentives to corporations to switch over to better sources of alternative energy, as opposed to taxing them in a punitive way to make it an incentive?
It takes all of the above, right? So this is, there are three sources of money on the planet: shareholders, taxpayers, and ratepayers, right? Consumers. Now, this is sort of the energy version of it, right? Ratepayers who pay for the electricity, right? Okay, so shareholders, capitalists, right? Stock in corporation, right? Taxpayers is all of us, and ratepayers is, you use the electricity, you pay for it. And, that's politics right there, right? That's the fight. So you have, everyone's favorite pariah, right? Exxon. They are actually publicly, more or less, advocating for a $50 per ton of CO2 federal carbon tax. They are trying to tax themselves. Okay, so why would they do that? Okay, the cynical version is, look, Exxon is half oil and half gas. $50 per ton of CO2 is 45 cents per gallon at the pump. We will still be driving. Whereas $50 on the gas side, which is enough to price coal out of the electricity system once and for all, and the natural gas side will make money for the very first time ever. Right? Actually, now they're making money because of Putin, but before February 24th, right? They hadn't made any money yet. So there's sort of the cynical version, right? But frankly, yeah, it takes that plus subsidies. Subsidies as in good stuff. Actually, just today, Biden administration invoked the Defense Production Act to buy heat pumps, solar panels. Right? So what does that mean? It's basically, the military-industrial complex being used for good on the climate front to buy heat pumps, right? Not for the rest of us, right? To install in our New York City apartments for free. This is the U.S. government buying them. But yeah, what do? They climb the learning curve, or they help us climb the learning curve, slide down the cost curve, and make the stuff cheaper for the rest of us. So at the end of the day, of course, it's a balance. And the right balance, that's way above my pay grade, right? That's the political part. And of course, it's the fight between the shareholders wanting the subsidies and the taxpayers, or the rest of us hopefully wanting the tax on the pollution, so we are not paying for Exxon to decarbonize its operations.
Cool. How are we doing for time? We're over time. All right. One more question. All right. This is the pressure's on. Make it great and brief.
It's going to be great.
All right.
Get ready. Ralph Waldo Emerson said there's no such thing as history. It's called biography. Everything in life is basically a story, but who gets to tell the story? I was just reading Deanna Einstein.
Is this going to be a question, or because I encourage questions?
Yes.
Okay.
There was only peace in this world during the feminine, like Deanna Einstein, the chalice and the sword. So what about you think about finding the new version of Lysistrata, where a little humor could go into spreading the word that way. It's an old story. Women go on a sexual strike until the men stop their cracking. But I mean a little humor and putting the attention on early childhood education, because your personality and character is formed by the time.
A question isn't just at the end, you say, do you agree?
What about things like that? Early childhood education?
Sure.
What do you mean, sure?
Yes, of course.
How would you do that? Just give me one.
Spend more money on early childhood. No, okay. So, is education the answer? Is that your question? Like,
It's also the whole idiotic thing about the feminine, which is cooperative, the male is domination, killing, destruction. What's the, does that have something to do with climate change? How many women are out there anyway? Just any kind of feedback you have about the role that women could play that might be more.
let me put it that way. My wife's a gynecologist, which is what we usually tell people. When we, if we get closer with them, I tell them that actually she's an abortion doc. She runs family planning for NYU Langone, right? She works on family planning, reproductive health. Look, I spend lots of time worrying about climate. So I spend 3 minutes of my average week worrying about that particular issue. She's a better human being. She spends 4 minutes of her week, right, worrying about what I do. But at the end of the day, of course, climate touches everything. So yes, reproductive choice is part of it. Early childhood education is part of the answer. All of these things are part of the answer. But if we consider everything to be climate policy, then basically nothing is, right? So in other words, it takes focus on, frankly, the biggest levers, what can make the biggest difference. So, would I be advocating for handing out carbon credits for early childhood education? Even though, of course, that is important because a more educated public is presumably going to vote for the right climate policies down the line. No, it's not. That's not right. That's not part of the immediate solution. There are more immediate things we should be doing. Right. That said, educating young girls in Bangladesh, giving them more choice, and frankly, the tools necessary to tackle not just climate but lots of different challenges and problems. Of course, that's part of the solution too.
Thank you.